When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All Things Podcast. I'm host Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host Mike Curran. And in this episode, which is titled Startups versus Big Tech for Web Developers, we're going to be talking about the difference in culture, the difference in, employee count. What's the kind of responsibility spread, I guess you could say, between a startup and big tech? What's the pace like? Is it crazy in one? Is it okay in the other? Is it crazy in both? What is it? Do you have any ownership in a big company? Do you have any ownership in a startup? A whole bunch of things like that, including career growth, mentorship, all that good stuff. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And remember that we have a 20% off Scrimba affiliate code. If you want to go and learn on their interactive media player code editor, you can learn front-end technologies right now as of recording, but back-end technologies is on the way. And remember, just like I said, I took the CSS variables course a while ago, and I was able to hey, what's that instructor doing? Pause, go mess with the code, kind of break it, figure out what the heck was going on, got my context, figured out the question in my own head, press play, and the lesson kept continuing. Pretty cool technology. If you want to go learn that stuff, please go check out our link. That'll be on htmlallthethings.com in the show notes, which will, of course, be in this show description on your podcast app.
The course is actually coming on April 14th, so that might be around the time that this episode releases. My thoughts?
Yes.
Yeah, because in a couple weeks, we're a couple weeks ahead in our recording. So that's the thing that I'm most excited for on Scrimba. I was like an early proponent of them doing more back-endy full stack stuff because that's where our industry is going. So I'm super excited to kind of go through the course and take it myself just to see what they're teaching, if I'm updated. So definitely go check that out. Our link is actually scrimba.com/link/HTML all the things. So if you don't want to go to the show notes and you want to just go to the link, do that. Get that 20% off. Again, that's scrimba.com/links/HTML all the things. But yeah, this episode isn't about Scrimba. It is all about startups versus big tech for web developers. And the goal of this episode is I want to let you guys know that there are differences, let everyone know. And I think when you're applying for jobs, when you're first getting into the industry, or if you're in the industry and you're in one of the startup or the big tech, maybe you're looking to make a switch, I want to kind of prepare you for that world, for whatever world you're going to go into, because they're different. They're in some ways significantly different. In some ways they can be similar, obviously. And the other part of this is that every startup is different and every, big corporation is different as well. So I'll be doing a lot of generalization during this podcast episode. It's not going to be 100% accurate to probably your experience. A lot of it is going to be anecdotal to me or the people that I've talked to about this and the research that I've done online and what's been kind of like the common trends of each of these kind of classifications. But overall, it should give you a good idea and should make it easier for you to aim for one, essentially, right? And you might be in different parts of your career where you're maybe you want to start as in big tech and then move to startups and then back to big tech. That's a pretty viable strategy. And I'll explain why a little bit later on. But essentially, locking yourself into one of these is also maybe not the right play. You want to know where the benefits are for each one, make the right choice, and then move to different elements on each side in different parts of your career. One of the theories I have, and why this kind of pertains, especially for startups, but one of the theories I have is that with the rise of AI, it will make it easier and kind of democratize the creation of proof of concepts and small startups, right? So a non-tech or not heavy tech developer could try something out, try market fit because they have maybe an audience of people already established, maybe they're plumbers, right? They're a plumber and they have a plumbing community maybe they think of an application for plumbers, they're able to do that now without being strictly web developers or any sort of developers, test out their concept on like their local group of friends, realize that it's very profitable, and from that, a startup can come, right? So that's a theory that I have of like how the AI will actually lead to potentially more jobs rather than less. And a lot of times in history, when a revolution of like some sort of, democratization or something is made easier, a lot of times what happens with that is that more companies are born out of that, right? Therefore, so yes, some stuff is automated, but because of the plethora of ideas out there and people are now able to create them without spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars, that will in turn drive the economy, drive the potential labor force and stuff like that. Not a guarantee, AI is a little bit of a different beast, but this is a very optimistic view. And for that, I wanted to specifically have like an episode talking directly about like, what startups are, because some of you might not have worked in a startup before, and maybe think about that as a potential landing spot for yourself in the future. Before we do that, I want to quickly define what I'm talking about, right? So what is big tech? Like, what are these big organizations? Essentially, when I'm talking about big tech, I'm talking about a fairly large company, definitely more than 100 employees, but looking at probably closer to 500 to 1,000. A FANG would be a perfect example of a big tech, or MANG, whatever you want to call it now, like Meta, Amazon, Apple, Google, like Netflix. All of those are considered to be big tech for sure. But also a lot of Fortune 500 companies would be falling under that, like Instacart, stuff like a lot of these companies will fall under. Uber definitely would be big tech, not part of FANG or MANG, obviously, but definitely should be. All of those would be considered big tech in reference to this episode. Other large enterprises that aren't maybe tech centric, still relevant to our discussion here, maybe not big tech, but still pretty much an enterprise. Still, a lot of what we're going to be talking about in terms of big tech will apply to them as well. And those companies are like big banks, like they have large development teams, obviously. Auto parts dealer, not auto parts dealers, but like an auto parts manufacturer might have a bunch of web developers. If they're big enough, they might need a web development team or like development team in general. Not directly tech, but have tech departments and are treated very much like a big organization. For startups, that's when we're talking about startups, that's usually small company, usually less than 100 employees. You could argue that there are like definitely 200 employee startups out there still. Another definition would be, maybe like, anywhere between 0 to 10 years time span for a company, or maybe 0 to 5 even. A lot of funding for startups is provided by investors, or it's like a bootstrap startup. So they made their own way to generate cash and then they reinvest that cash back into their business to kind of grow it at a small scale. But yeah, that's essentially a smaller company that's focused on growing and testing out an idea.
Well, we may actually too. One thing I wanted to say about the startups is that like it's almost like there's like a subcategory there, because like startups that are on the I guess the dime of the investor are usually like maybe like a lot crazier than those that are either bootstrapped or are profitable themselves. Like a startup does not necessarily have to be funded by things that are not the normal cash flow. What I mean by that is like if you go to like open up like a corner store, let's just say it's a startup somehow, and you're like, well, I'm going to sell apples, but like I'm going to take 10 million from an investor, and then that investor is going to give me a parameter of like, you must sell this many apples, you must have these many displays, you must have this much social media, whatever it is. And then it's chaos because you're like panicking, trying to give value slash make good on the deal that you made with the person that gave you a bunch of money. But if you're like, hey, I need 10 million a year to be sustainable, I'm making 10 million a year, okay, we're on that line. That's a different environment because you can kind of be like, okay, let's chill a little bit. We're going to keep still pushing forward because we don't want to be on the line. We want to keep growing. Of course, that's what capitalist companies do. They keep growing. But it's like, hey, we don't have to be like, oh my God, we need to make sure that we hit all these things. And now we're running out of money. We need to find another investor. And what are we going to do? It's like, no, it's much more sustainable. I mean, you can see this in your real life too, when you like pay off a huge debt and you're like, whoa, that payment is gone. That thing is gone. I don't need to worry about that payment any longer. That's a huge thing for people. It's like a huge sigh of relief. And it's not like you're going to just suddenly be like, well, I've paid off, whatever big debt it is. I'm just going to stop working. That's not how it works. But it's the same kind of idea. So there's almost like those two types of startup. if you will, because like, I mean, every startup's going to be different. Every big tech's going to be different too. But at the same time, it's like, if your company is like paying $2 to get a $1 paying client, I mean, that's not sustainable. So you're going to be constantly chasing the dragon there. You're going to be constantly chasing new investors, new customers, but your customers are only paying 50% of back. So you're always chasing new, and then the cycle keeps going, and then that experience will be passed down inevitably to the employees.
Yeah, it's a different, like, you're 100% right. Startups can be wildly different in their culture, in how they generate income, in if they even need to generate income. Like very good examples are Uber, right? Like Uber was a startup, obviously, when it first started. It did not generate income. And it didn't generate income for years and years and years and years and years, right? Like even past the stage of what I would say a startup should generate income. But because of its potential to continue to grow, it kept getting money from these VC investors and eventually did start to generate an income. And same thing with like Airbnb, same thing with any of these like kind of larger Instacart, any of these kind of larger companies that seems to have had a ton of workforce, but not a lot of income, or even if they did have a lot of income, their workforce was way more than that. All of that is to say that they were very, very well-funded companies that were not meant to even generate income. That's the other part. Sometimes a company is like, hey, we can survive on, a year of runway, but we need to be in 50% of that year of runway, we need to be generating an income. That's a very typical startup thing. So that after that year is up, we're already in a place where we can start paying employees. That's normal. That's a very normal path. But then there's like a company that could go like, hey, because this idea is so complicated and we have like the secret sauce, we can't generate an income for at least 10 years or 5 years. And we're going to need funding all the way through that. But when we get to that funding stage, or when we get to the income stage, we're going to generate 100x or 1000x and be able to fund and be able to become like $1 billion company. Like, so very, very
like
different things. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say like the key there is like a lot of these companies are either they're in the beginning, they're generating no income. Then they start generating income, even large amounts of income in terms of dollar amounts. But it's like they'll earn like $10 million of income. But then for every $10 million of income that they gain, they owe like 20 million or they owe like 15 million. So it's like that thing I was saying where you're paying $2 for a $1 customer. I mean, this is just the Gemini kind of preview or whatever, AI overview. But it says Uber is now profitable, having reported its first annual profit as a public company in 2023 with a net income of 1.9 billion after consistently reporting losses since its IPO, which is initial public offering, in 2019.
Yep. So that's a successful startup, but not every startup is successful. And part of what I'm going to be talking about is there's a lot of risk here. So I'm going to jump right in. Or actually, first of all, really quickly, my experience, right? I want to give a perspective of what I know, what I'm comfortable talking about, and why I'm comfortable talking about maybe startups, but not as much big tech. I've worked at a larger startup before that's transitioned to a mid-sized company. So I worked at Molekule, which is an air purifier company. I was part of their web development team, and they were probably in that 100 to 200 employee range when I left. When I joined, they were maybe a little bit under 100. So again, I was there for the transitioning phase from startup to something else. So I have a little bit of experience, mid-size. They were a little bit more structured. They weren't as startup-y with some startup stuff there. But personally, that's the extent of my like larger tech, mid-size tech experience. The only other understanding that I have of big tech, and the reason that I can talk about it to some degree, is that I have quite a few family and friends that work in big tech. So I have family and friends that work at Amazon, Instacart, Facebook, and Apple. So it's just one of those things that we've talked about a lot personally. And then also, obviously, I've done a lot of research into these companies and how they work just for my own interest. And that's where a lot of what I'm going to be talking about big tech is coming from. Currently, I'm working at a startup, started as employee number 9 or 8, and we're currently at 30 to 40. So that's also why I can talk about startups so well. First thing here, let's jump in. Scope and breadth of responsibilities, right? So for a startup, developers are going to definitely wear many hats, right? You're going to have, most of the time, at least today, you're going to have full stack responsibilities. You're going to need to know front end, back end to a certain degree. you're probably going to need to know some DevOps because you're going to come in and there's going to be some systems in place, but you're going to need to understand how to push your code to the server, how to do testing on the server and stuff like that. And the other part is, and this is actually a benefit in my opinion of working at a startup, you're going to have to learn a little bit of customer support. A lot of times, if you're developer number 1, 2, 3, there's not going to be a very big customer support team. So if there's a Discord for your product, you're probably going to be in there and talking to customers that have issues. And in my opinion, this is one of the biggest benefits of working at a startup is that you get to be very direct with your customers, and knowing how a customer uses your product is going to make you a better developer. Okay. Because whenever we're building in our like isolated little box, whatever feature we're building, a lot of times it's, it makes sense in our heads. It makes sense on paper. It makes sense when we test it. But the reality is that until a user actually uses it, you don't know if it works. And it could be as simple as like you put a button under in a place that someone has to scroll to, and they never find that button, and that just doesn't work. And it's just a button. But people don't realize that they have to scroll, so therefore they don't know that they can even press that button, and therefore you would never know that until you kind of get into like the habit of checking people's issues and looking at the analytics and talking to people that are using your product. And when you talk to them, you're going to realize, hey, okay, I need to put the button here, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to also realize like, hey, maybe performance matters in some cases and maybe performance doesn't matter in other cases, right? You're going to talk to a customer and realize that they don't want to wait 3 seconds for a certain page to load. And you're going to be like, oh, I didn't realize that it mattered. Or you might talk to customers and ask them, hey, did you care about like, hey, I optimized this page, it's loading really quickly. They're like, I don't care. This button doesn't work. Or I don't care. Like, I could have waited a few seconds for this analytics to load. I didn't need you to spend, 15 days optimizing and caching this analytics when you could have spent that time fixing this bug or adding this feature that I've requested. So understanding that kind of customer experience side of things will make you a better developer in the long run, and will make you understand products from a completely different perspective than just kind of like going into a large enterprise level product and working on a feature and never seeing the outcome of that feature, which is the user actually using it. The other thing here is high autonomy. So because you're going to be working on smaller teams, because you're going to be working with small groups of people, you're going to have a lot of opportunity to tell your kind of ideas for product direction and influence, technical decisions, influence product decisions on a high level. Like you can do a lot in a small team, in a small company, because everyone is kind of looking for advice. Everyone is looking to each other to get direction. And the more vocal you are, the better it might be to get your ideas across. And that might feel really good for you. Like if you're someone that wants to have influence in a product, a startup is definitely the place where you're going to have probably the most influence. A potential downside to a startup in the scope and breadth of responsibilities is because of the lack of specialization and because of wearing too many hats, the risk of burnout can definitely raise, like quite a bit. Like risk of burnout in a startup, I think, is significantly higher than other jobs. There was a Stack Overflow developer survey in 2023 where startup developers often reported much higher job diversity, like that's a bonus, but also much higher stress. Stress leads to burnout. So you got to watch for that. Not every startup is like that, but in a generalization, you're definitely, because you're wearing so many hats, you might feel stretched thin.
Well, that's something that you and I've discussed a couple of times, and like we've mentioned it kind of in piecemeal on the show across various episodes as well, where I was saying to you that like one of the issues that I always like face in my own head is like if I'm always like on the clock, like if someone can always reach out to me, am I allowed to do things that require my full attention or that will take me away from the desk? Like, am I leashed to the desk? Like, can I go golfing? Can I go to an event where I can't leave? Like, can I go to a concert at which there's no reentry and I don't have like a table where I could just set up a laptop? Like, can I go do those things? And like, I feel as though, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I feel as though a lot of startup developers probably feel that, where they're always, they're always a Slack message away from getting pulled into something huge. And that's probably weighing on them because they're probably realizing like, man, if I go out golfing, I'm in the middle of a field. How am I supposed to help you? and you're getting like ding, 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 ding. Okay, add to group, ding, 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 ding. Now there's a war room, ding, 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 ding. And it's like, can you do that? And like, if you're like a robot and if you're a robot, if you look at it from like, I guess objectively, if you remove the human component, the answer is no, you cannot. You must be always available to go back to your desk, or you must always have a laptop. But then if you add the human element of like, hey, you're going to start burning out, I feel like this, again, in my personal opinion, this is where that risk of burnout starts to happen, because people start to panic because they're not only are they called into things like that, but then there's also the risk of it happening at any time, even when it's not happening. And like something like, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but like in a big tech, I mean, big tech doesn't always have this, but big tech will commonly have a lot of systems, right, to keep things running. And one of those systems is, okay, like you're on call one week a month, right? Or 1 week every 6 weeks or something. And then that is like, okay, I need to be leashed. Cause like I used to work in IT, and the IT people would say like, well, like I can't do certain things on that week. Like I just sort of like stay at home, but they're like, I plan all my home stuff for that week. So they're like, it's kind of nice because I can just kind of tell all my friends and stuff like, yo, like I'm unavailable, or my family, I'm unavailable. But it allows me to just like, make sure the yard's nice and like do my house stuff. Maybe I paint the house or whatever, right? Home improvement, fix things up in the house. And they're like, I keep on top of that. And then if I get pulled into something, like I just walk into the next room and I'm there, or I hop in the car and I go to the office kind of thing. You're always there. So they're like leashed, but they're leashed with like knowledge being leashed, I guess. So like it's like that I wouldn't be surprised is a big part of burnout. At the very least, it's a big part of burnout for me.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. And like in the startup that I'm working at right now, I've implemented a on-call schedule for that exact reason, because I don't want that to happen. Like I want people to be able to take off and not have to bring their laptop and stuff like that. And on-call solves that. It's not a very difficult thing to implement. The difficult part is if you're employee number, 2, 3, 4, and you're the only developer on the team, which is a very real possibility in a startup culture, like
Right.
depending on how early you are, then you're right. Like that's where first of all, you're wearing all the hats. And on top of that, you're also the customer support a lot of times and the triager. And so like, yeah, in that scenario, if you're putting yourself in a position where you're not only at a startup, but you're early at a startup, that's a risk of like, yeah, you're tethered to your laptop at that point. If, the site goes down, the app goes down, and that can clearly lead to lost sales or lost revenue for a startup, super, super, super like dangerous. So that it's a good point to point out, because you need to be okay with putting yourself in that position if you're going to go into that position. Some people are. I know some people on my team like don't care, and they're just like, yeah, I'm available all the time. Okay, great. They're younger usually. That's fine. Like that's perfectly okay if that's your mindset. But some people have families and stuff like that, and they need that ability to unclock or like unplug. And that's what the on-call schedule is for. And it's worked great. We haven't had any issues with that. So like there is ways to implement some smart big tech decisions into startups to make it not as bad for people, but you need to make sure if you're okay with that, essentially. And a lot of startups don't do that. So it's something you can ask at the interview process. If you care, if you don't care, then you can offer up your services to be that scapegoat of like always being on call, and that's fine. Like, it's up to the person at the end of the day. But yeah, it's definitely a consideration to make. With big tech for scope and breadth and responsibilities, usually you're going to have very clearly defined roles. So developers are going to specialize in specific areas. So you're going to be brought onto a team to do their front end, like a front or a piece of the front end a lot of times, right? You're going to be brought on as an infrastructure or a, software solutions developer, where you're going to be just doing not only like not just front end or not front end or back end. You're going to be doing like the integrations between a client and the application. And so you're working on an even smaller vertical of of development, right? So a lot of times it's going to be very specialized, and yeah, like it's just going to be less knowledge from like a jack of all trades perspective, but more depth. So you're going to need to know whatever area you're working in a lot deeper. Opportunity there is you're going to be able to master some skill sets. So if, you're working in backend Java, you're going to be working in backend Java all the time. You're going to get good at it. And that is a skill set that you can sell. Whereas with a startup, maybe like you're going to 1 week work on JavaScript on the front end or like Svelte on the front end. And then all of a sudden you're going to be working in Node.js on the back end for a week. And then you're going to be working in like some sort of scripting language to do a bash script for, getting your DevOps operational, whatever. Like you're going to be bouncing around a lot. So it's a lot harder to get deeper knowledge in that sense. You'll have a very good opportunity to gain a lot of knowledge across the scope and across the spectrum and understand what you like. So that's a positive for startups, but you also will lose that ability to go really, really, really deep into something, which is pretty advantageous, especially with the coming of AI. In my opinion, one of the things that's going to separate people is that deep expertise. Like if you're going to know how to fix the AI problems that come up, like the vibe coders that create, that's going to make you a lot more valuable to a company versus just being a very, very like shallow jack of all trades in certain ways.
There's something too, and I just have like a story kind of, but it like emphasizes the deepness, I guess, that you can get in a skill set in a big company. Used to work at a big company, had to work with the developer that was working on how the VPN settings menu worked on a BlackBerry. And he was, he used to code it, like he used to code that menu. And then he came up to me, and I was a sysadmin, and I used to like be kind of like tech support for the devs and stuff. Basically DevOps before there was a DevOps thing, and before there was a DevOps title, I suppose. And he came up to me one day. He's like, "Okay, how do you connect?" And I said, "Oh, like you need to connect to my like test network." He's like, "No, like how do you use VPNs? Like how do you connect to VPNs?" And I was like, "Wait, what? Like you're, whatever his name was, I don't remember, but I was like, "You're this guy, right? Like you're the head VPN developer, right?" He's like, "Yeah, but I don't know how to like use the settings menu. I don't know how to use the device." And it's like, oh, like he only understands, like I think he was writing like the driver for the VPN or whatever. Like he was very technical, obviously, and very much just like into the code. But it's very interesting to me that I was like, oh, okay, swipe down, go to settings, all the rest of the steps. But it was very like shocking. And it's like, I mean, he would know the VPN, code way better than I would, but he also did not know how to test it out himself. And that's an example of like very deep understanding in a very narrow area.
Yeah, and that has its risks too, obviously. Like I kind of mentioned the advantage of that, but like if you're a very deep VPN developer and all of a sudden VPNs are no longer needed for whatever reason, you're kind of SOL. Like if you don't know how to even test that part, like if you're so deep in it that you're afraid to get out of that bubble, which happens to a lot of people, you might have put your eggs all in one basket. So I think it's important to have some specialization for sure, but it's also important to be somewhat generalist to understand what's out there, to at least be able to switch between the technologies and get deeper into a different one if you need to. And that's going to make you even more valuable. One of the kind of downsides is a lot of times because you're not going to be able to have a lot of influence on a product, because you're not going to be able to work on the system as a whole, a lot of what you're going to be doing is going to have some reduced visibility into the direction of the product. So you might get stuck as the guy that integrates the product with other people's, solutions, and you get really good at writing like a really simple, like a really basic JSON script that does that, or like whatever. And that's what you do for 7 years, and you never learn anything else because you don't need to. So then when you get laid off, your skill set might not transfer because you become so like complacent and okay at this like really basic integration that you've become really good at. It's a very real thing that can happen in these large corporations that have cogs in the machine, is that cog has different levels of complexity, but they still need someone there. And so like, and as soon as you get good at something, they don't want to replace you. And if you're not the one that's pushing for it, you can get stuck there, right? Like you can, in a large corporation, there's nothing stopping you from applying to other jobs internally or trying to move around on your team, but you have to be the one that does that. A lot of times when a manager sees you successful in a role, their goal will be to keep you successful in that role, right? Because that's the status quo. They're trying to meet the status quo. And they will actively, maybe not even actively, but like passively, try to prevent you from getting around. But you might have to get out of the way and just try to hey, I've mastered this. I want to try something else. I can train someone up, except there's different strategies for that, but keep keep mindful of not getting stuck as a small cog in a big machine. Like you want to be, if you're in a big machine, try to become a bigger cog, understand it, understand the bigger thing, and then move on to the next one and stuff like that.
There's also like bureaucracy is going to, I mean, inevitably come up probably multiple times in this episode, or especially in your experience at Big Tech if you do choose to join one. And I mean, it's very easy for the bureaucracy to break down for edge cases. And so if you're like, hey, like I would like to move teams and they don't have a process for that, I mean, then that's it. Mike said, you can apply internally. That's a system that company has come up with. If they are, recently in big tech, or if they're trying to be more organic or something like that, and they don't want to have a lot of systems, that's going to be an issue, because then they're like, okay, we want this person to do this. We don't have a system for that. We're trying to be more organic, but we're still big, and we can't just start making moves, because then like, how do we get them a new employee number? Things like that is like important at a big tech. It'll be like, well, your badge won't badge you into that because your employee number starts with 2. We need to change it to 3, but we also have a policy that states that 2 can never become 3. So how the hell do we get around this? And then it's like, well, we don't have a process for that. So who do we talk to? Maybe we take to HR. People are going to try to bounce that around where they don't want that on their plate because it's confusing and it's hard. And they're going to struggle also to get things to actually happen. So they're going to be like, well, like, I don't know about that, whatever. Like we had that discussion a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, whatever it was released, about like our burnout episode. The CIA episode, if you will. And that was a thing where it's like multiple people have to approve things. Like even if one would be good enough, oftentimes it's like 3 or 4. And this person's on vacation, that person's not around, this person doesn't know what you mean, that person doesn't like this. And so you have a bunch of personal, professional, and bureaucratic systems all coming to a head. And then it's like, well, let's just say it's disapproved because that's easier. And that'll happen a lot in a big company. Like, let's just say we're not going to do that because we don't know how to do the paperwork. And this guy's a really stickler about paperwork. That guy isn't, but this one is. So, let's just not do it. And it's like, well, okay. Like, we're going to walk ourselves into problems. We're going to walk ourselves into an issue, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of spirals into this really complex thing. And a lot of it is not like people being malicious. It's just the fact that the system is so complex that it's like, I don't want to do this. So that's gonna stop you. Like that, like human instinct to not want to cause a ruckus and not want to do that extra step that is not required of them is going to stop you in your tracks a lot of times at a large corporation. It can stop you at a small startup too, if the person is like that. But a lot of times a startup, there's ways around it, right? Like there's just not this bureaucracy that's in place that stops the ways around it. There's like, if this person doesn't want you on their team, you can just do customer support more, or you can put the role of a salesperson on, or you can do even more technical stuff. Like you just have a lot more options with less bureaucracy in place. Now, let's move on to the next one here, which is development pace and workflows. This is a pretty big one for startups versus big tech. Startups have definitely faster iteration cycles. So a lot of time there's going to be very quick prototyping, very much MVP mindset. You're trying out different ideas a lot of the time. And that's what a startup's supposed to do. If they're not doing that, then that's like a red flag to me. You're supposed to try out an idea, change it completely, try something else out, try out multiple ideas. So a lot of times when you're doing that, your development cycle is going to be very, very quick. So you'll put something together really quickly that has a really good working feature. You'll get it out there to develop to users. You'll get their feedback, and then you'll add another feature, or you'll pivot to another, whatever you're doing. And it's a very like really sudden, quick movement that isn't very rigid. Like it doesn't have a lot of processes applied to it. Like if you're the only developer, or if there's only a few of you, a lot of times they won't even use like the traditional agile Scrum methods. You won't have your retrospectives and your story points. You'll just have a planning session of like, hey, who's going to take on what feature, and then go. And then all of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, the features are all done and you're shipping the product. No one really cares about, how many story points it took, how long it took you to do this little thing, how long it took you to do that other thing. No one's counting hours. No one's counting really productivity. They're just making sure that their product is being built, and that's it. Right. So it's very quick. It's less structured, and it also pushes you to learn a lot and experiment a lot right there and then. right? Like you just have to, like, if you don't know how to do it, you just put something together, right? Like you just throw it in ChatGPT nowadays, but before you would just throw it in Stack Overflow and see what came up, or throw it on Google and see what came up and just use that solution really quickly and test it out. Like there's like a lot less time for planning features. There's just more time for like, hey, just try to get it done. Let's try to get it out there and see if it even makes sense to spend more time on this, right? And I like that approach from like a personal perspective. I like getting something as quickly out there, like a proof of concept, because if you spend a lot of time planning a feature, right? Let's say you go the traditional route of, creating a design document, spending a bunch of time there, then implementing that design document, doing whatever you can, trying to stick to that design document, spending like weeks or months on that, and then getting that feature out there, and the feature comes back as just not working or doesn't help the customers in any way. You've just wasted a ton of cycles on something that could have been quickly thrown together, maybe not perfect, but quickly thrown together in a week or two without a design doc, with just some back and forth with a product manager or something like that. Get it tested, and then if you prove in the test that this is what people want, then you go back, create a design document with already like the knowledge that you've gained from building the proof of concept. This design document is going to be way more robust, way more accurate. You're going to know what you need to improve. You're going to know what you need to remove. You're going to know what you need to add. And then you go through and have another cycle of making it more rigid, like making it better, making the product have, more tests around it, making the product have less edge cases of breaking, easier, like better documented for the next developer to come in, stuff like that. So that's the cycle that startups typically go down, is the fast iteration, quick, move fast and break things kind of mindset. And then as a startup matures, you'll have this kind of back and forth with fast iteration. Let's go back to fix it up if everything's working, or kibosh it if it's not. Then fast iteration, fix it a little bit. Fast iteration, fix it a little bit. That's a good back and forth cycle. In the early stages, when you're moving super fast, there's definitely a downside because you're not able to address the technical debt that starts to appear. So you make this great feature, and then they're like, well, we're so early that we need to test 4 more features before we can even go back to fix the first one. That's a very common issue. A lot of times, the first product that a startup builds is going to need a complete rewrite in a year or two. That's just a normal thing that happens. That's normal software development practices. That's not a red flag. If that's the case, it's okay. Like you've proven the idea. Let's spend some time now. Let's bring in some more developers. It's generating income already. Let's put that income back in. Let's rebuild the product more robustly. Let's put some more systems in place. That's a good method of development. Going for the best thing ever from the beginning, especially in a startup, that's going to kill you. That's going to drain your funds, and it's going to make 0 sense, even if a rewrite is required in a year or two.
That's something that is always on my like alarm bells, like internal head alarm bells, I guess, is the technical debt accruing. Because I'll go in and I'll start doing things, and I'm like, hey, like, we just kind of threw this together. I think this is working now. And it's like, all right, cool. Like, let's go. And it's like, well, hold up. Like, we're supposed to test. It's like, oh no, we got to test this other thing. We're gonna go over here. It's like, okay, okay. And then you kind of run around, and I find that this is actually really challenging. Not necessarily just with startups, but as a freelancer, where I don't have all the insights of the full company. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're in a big company, you don't have the full insights of the whole company either. But as a freelancer, like I personally work with a lot of small to medium businesses, and like I'm not in the room with like the CEO and like the department heads or whatever. They are having that meeting alone, and then they approach me, and I don't have the full context. So then I go do something. I put a lot of effort into like feature 1 of 3, let's say, but they really care about feature 3, but they presented all of them with equal importance to me. So now it's like I have a very robust feature 1, which is useless. I have like an okay feature 2, 3, and then they're like, okay, well, just ship it. We don't want to pay more. And you could see how this sort of like fragmented, kind of craziness goes. And like, I mean, small to medium businesses, obviously startups, fall, I guess, legally, at least here in Canada, like they fall quote unquote legally into like that employee count. But startups always feel like they're trying to become the person that owns the skyscraper, if that makes sense. Whereas like these other businesses are very much that I'm working with are very much like this person owns a car garage. Person owns a car garage. That person owns a painting business. They like painting. That person likes fixing cars, and like that's just what they did. They're in it to make money for their own family. They're in it to grow for their own family and maybe their employees if it's small town stuff, But it still has a little bit of that startup flair where it's very much like, well, I was thinking this. It's like, why didn't you tell me that? Now the feature's not right. And so the technical debt alarm has grown through my experience. And if I'm working with a startup as a freelancer, it's something that sets off alarm bells where I'm always like, we got like 4 things that are kind of like question marks here. Should we be proceeding? And then they're just like, let's just go. Okay, I guess. Like,
Yes.
let's just see what happens, I guess.
That's the mindset. It's let's just see what happens. And that, like, again, the idea is that out of those 4, 3 might fail, and that's okay. That's not the risk, but like that's part of the process. So that's what you have to kind of buy in a little bit when you're part of a startup. You're going to make stuff that's not going to work and move on to the next thing. And if you can't pivot, that's a way bigger red flag than someone that is willing to take those risks and try features out that probably won't work, because one of those features might. And until you do it, until you get it in front of a customer, you don't know what the situation is. Now, there can be more planning done, et cetera, but depending on how stretched thin the product team is, development team is, a lot of that planning gets put on the side burner and it's just done in real time. Like, you just need to own the process of getting it to a point where it can be tested, and that will give you that opportunity to, again, be more impactful in the company and learn a lot quicker, because you're just doing so many different things at the same time. You're just iterating, creating a new feature, iterating, creating a new feature. Whereas with big tech, it's a lot more structured. So in some ways, this is good, right? Like, obviously you have a full release cycle, right? Like, so you have very structured sprints. You have the typical, sprint kickoff meeting, daily stand-ups, a sprint review, like a sprint retrospective at the end. That during the sprint kickoff, you'll do your story pointing, you'll play your poker, like figuring out how each one of the tasks is rated in terms of complexity and time. You'll know how long a task should take. You'll spend a lot of time building out a doable cycle of tasks, and then you'll look at all those tasks and see how you perform at the end. And you'll know if you're slacking, you'll know if you're doing good, you'll know if you can do more tasks. You'll add in testing to all your tasks. So that's going to double the amount of time it's going to make to do something. You'll obviously have a QA process that will have to begin at some point. So that's going to double the amount of time to release a task, because the QA process is also very rigid. Like, here's a bunch of test cases that you have to fill out. Here's a bunch of that. And the QA team will fill that out. Then there'll be a back and forth with the QA and the developers and the product team, where they'll, decide on which tickets need to be, critically fixed, which can be fixed in the backlog, whatever. And then there will be a rollout period of like a certain amount of time for actually getting the thing into production. So if you take a startup cycle, and let's say you're doing a feature that should take you 2 weeks in a startup, a feature that would take 2 weeks in a startup will be at minimum 6 weeks at a regular larger corporation that's less startup-y. Now, having said that, again, I've said early on in this episode that they're different. Big tech firms work differently. A lot of them are actually trying to go back to more startup culture where you're able to ship a lot faster. But the reality is that if you're in that rigid cycle that I'm talking about, it's not a double, it's like a triple increase in time to roll out a single feature. And that's normal. And that's what they want a lot of the time, because it makes your code more reliable, more maintainable, more predictable, from a sense of like, how long is this feature going to take? Well, we have previous features that we've scoped out that are very similar, that we have these timelines already ready for, all these points that we've assigned to. We can make a good prediction how long it's going to take for that feature to be built out. Now, is it going to be longer than a startup? Most likely, yes. No matter what you're doing, all the features are going to take you a longer time than a startup would take than do it. But if you're looking for reliability, scalability, maintainability, all the really important things in development, especially at scale, this is probably one of the only ways to go about it. Now, you can dial stuff back. You can, turn some dials and make the QA process a little bit smoother, make the code testing, do stuff in parallel. There's ways to optimize the system, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a cycle. There needs to be a system in place, a pretty rigid one at that, to make sure that nothing goes crazy to your, 10 million users potentially that you have on your platform, to require this kind of system. Now, when you're first starting out, the reason that you can move a lot faster is that you have no users. There's no one that you're trying to gain your users. You get 1,000, couple thousand here, couple thousand there. That's not critical in the sense of like wide scale negative feedback. But if you roll out a bad feature to 10 million users, that's, a catastrophe. Like, you'll be in the news. The news will pick you up. You'll be on Forbes. You'll be, in different news platforms that you have, created this weird feature that doesn't work. Like, how many times have we seen the Facebook redesign be mocked in the news because people just don't like change or whatever? Every cycle, every time something big happens on Facebook, at least it used to. Facebook isn't really that much relevant anymore, but it used to be that like any small change to Facebook, it would literally make the news because you're affecting millions and millions of people. So you need these cycles. Like, you need a more rigid process. And with that, obviously, comes a slower pace of innovation due to the bureaucracy of adding it. So it's a trade-off, a necessary trade-off to a certain degree, but that's the difference. Like, if you want to move fast, if you want to have less rigid process, which a lot of people do, like they don't like those structured processes, that's a startup culture. And then if you want the more rigid process, and some people like that too, because they want to have like, hey, these are the tickets that I'm working on, and that's all I really need to care about. Then I go home and I clock off and I don't really care about anything else. That's a more like structured big tech, late stage startup, like whatever. But like, you could see the very drastic difference there between the two.
I do want to address a couple things. So I remember you were like, when you were talking about the startup part, you did say like, someone who can't move like in an agile manner is a bit of a red flag. But I would say it's maybe a red flag for a startup, but it's not a red flag necessarily for big tech because of what you just mentioned, where some of these programs, like if you take Microsoft and Windows, like Windows has a massive install base. I mean, if a person who cannot move in an agile manner, but is very good at ensuring that that structured release cycles happen, that bug fixes happen, that they know, okay, this is my environment, this is Windows 11. These are all the things that must be checked. These are the things that we are touching in this update. These are the things that will be affected indirectly by us touching this. People who are very good at that, kind of like a structured, slow by startup standard person, I guess you could say, like someone who's like very meticulous, a very meticulous developer, a very meticulous tester, QA, wherever that person falls. I think that it's maybe red flag for one and green flag for another. Because someone who's like, I'm just going to go, come on, let's go faster. It's like, whoa, this is the Windows team. Like, but we can't be releasing an update. Like you said, you'll reach the news if you're like, but Windows forced an update today that literally erased everybody's data. Like, well, think about this. It isn't just people with their vacation photos. How much money was lost?
Yeah,
because
you might go to jail for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, like how much money was lost because of all the data. Like, I mean, I have all my tax documents on here. That is like, I don't know, 100 hours of me putting that together or something. I don't know, it's making that up. But let's just say it was 100 hours. 100 hours of me putting together all this bookkeeping and stuff. I mean, imagine that going away. Imagine our QuickBooks or like our accounting software. Just we spend hours and hours, over the course of the year doing the bookkeeping, doing all this stuff, and then we get it ready for the accountant, and then we log in one day and all the data's gone. Now, we're a small business. Think about a huge business that's doing $1 million contracts. I mean, that's like, oh, so we just have to somehow materialize our books. And I mean, I don't know how the government would handle this, but I guarantee, or I shouldn't say guarantee, I would assume, at least in Canada, they're going to be like, well, it's not our fault that your books got erased. Where's your books on this day? This is the deadline. You trusted QuickBooks screwed you over potentially. And this is hypothetical, but it's like if QuickBooks or your accounting software of choice screw you over somehow, it's kind of like, well, it's not really our problem. This is the due date for your taxes. So having somebody who is very meticulous and goes in and goes, okay, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do that. This is how we're going to notify users. This is how we're going to scale it. This is how we're going to do this. Because here's the thing. There's going to be issues no matter what. But imagine the chaos of issues across 100 million computers or whatever Windows is running on in a startup manner where it's like, let's just go. Oh, shoot. None of the buttons work. Okay, let's just quickly fix that. It's like, well, we can't now because the update button also doesn't work. Now what do we do? Well, let's just get everybody to erase it. Everybody? Like, are you sure everybody knows how to do that? How many people are going to arrive at the Geek Squad desk and be like, I just bought this computer and this computer no longer works. This computer sucks. You are going to cause RMAs. You're going to cause like so many issues. So I wanted to address that is like, if somebody is not a person that moves quickly, but they're very meticulous, I mean, that's a green flag somewhere. and you're likely going to find a role in a place like the Windows team or I mean, you mentioned Facebook not being super relevant. I think it's more like it's not in the zeitgeist anymore, but if they accidentally erase everyone's account, that would hit the news. Because it's more like just Facebook's always there now. It's no longer exciting. It's just sort of like, yeah, I have a Facebook. It's not an exciting thing of our lives anymore. It's just part of it. It's like how QuickBooks isn't making the news every day. But if QuickBooks accidentally lost the financial records of everybody, that would be very bad. Very, very bad.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So 2 different approaches to this. If you're looking for the more loose approach where you can do a lot really quickly and test things and break things in production, I think startup is obvious there. If you're looking to be a more rigid developer and you want that structure, or if you've already thrived in that structure and that's the thing you want to do, then big tech is the way to go, right? You can have, again, a mix of both for sure. Some big tech is trying to bring back that startup feel, but they can't to the full impact because of what Matt and I were just mentioning. The next thing I have here is career growth and mentorship. So for a startup, you can definitely have a very direct path to accelerated learning, right? Because you're going to be thrown into the deep end a lot of times. You're going to have to hit roadblock after roadblock, try to rapidly problem solve throughout the time that you're there, learn a lot of big things all at once, and that will teach you a lot of things about a lot of things, right? Like you're going to be more of a generalist for sure, but you're going to learn how to troubleshoot really, really well, really quickly across different scopes, and that's a good thing. Like learning how to fix a back-end problem and a front-end problem is 2 different things. And having the skill set of learning how to problem solve those things and go through roadblocks is something you can definitely talk about on interviews, is something that can be a pretty significant career booster for you versus going down the path of, again, a very, very narrow scope and learning only how to do that. Now, there's caveats to both. Don't get me wrong. I mentioned that a deep knowledge is really, really important, and I still agree. I still go by that. But having the ability to prove that you have gone through kind of the fire of a startup will make it easier for you to get the next startup job guaranteed. How I've done hiring before is, for startups in general, is I will very much look for a startup developer. They're different than a big tech developer, okay? Because a big tech developer is looking for that like more structured approach. They're looking for a narrower scope. They're looking to go deeper into something. And they haven't gone to that point of like, hey, I have a front end issue that just went down. And then the next hour I have a back end issue that just went down. And then the next hour I have like a database problem. They haven't gone through that fire yet. And that is a different skill set and different learnings. Not that they couldn't, many of them probably could, but that's a different skill set. And the proof that you could do that isn't there for me if you've just done Java at a big tech firm for, 5 years. Okay. It's a completely different mindset. And so if you want to go down the mindset of becoming that like solutions architect, that's a more startup career growth mentor. Like that's a more startup-y mindset. When you can come into any problem, learn it deeply enough to make progress and be able to hit that roadblock and go through it. And again, having that experience and being able to put that on your resume and talk about it in an interview will set you apart, right? Even in big tech, like when you're coming onto big tech, they will look at that a lot of times and be like, okay, well, he's already proven that he can be a generalist. Let's bring him in, see if he understands problem solving and if he can be maybe we can use him in multiple different ways. A lot of times like that's how they think from a startup developer perspective. Now, with that, from a mentorship perspective, a lot of times in a startup, everyone is stretched even thinner than like a big tech firm. Again, different jobs, different companies are different in this case, but a lot of times you're going to get less structured mentorship and less structured onboarding in a startup. And so if you're looking for that formalized mentor-mentee relationship and you want like a nice, smooth onboarding process, the reality is that like a big tech will probably give you that better than a startup for the most part. Now, can you learn a ton from the developers around you if you're going to like a medium-sized startup? Absolutely. If you ask them the right questions, if they're people that are more open to teaching, you can definitely get there. It's just a lot of times not formalized. So if you have developers there that don't care about mentorship, you're kind of SOL and you're in the deep end. And if they don't care, they're not really forced to mentor you. So it's a sink or swim situation where if you can't do it yourself, you're probably going to get let go. That's a very real possibility at a startup versus big tech, still possibility, but a lot of times they have like a situation where as soon as you get the job, you'll be assigned a senior developer that is your mentor for the next 6 months of your probation. And their responsibility is to answer your questions, direct you to the right person for specific questions. They're like your career path. Like they're a way for you to get a more direct approach to leveling up in your career. And the other thing with big tech is that a lot of times, speaking of leveling up, you'll have very defined roles of like, hey, you're going to start as a junior developer, then you're going to go to like mid-level, senior, staff engineer. There's this really clear path for going from, junior to wherever you want to go, or management or whatever, right? So it's a little bit easier to see that career path, whereas a startup, the titles don't really matter. Like you could be a junior developer that gets a senior developer title. No one really gives a crap about what your title is. And then you could like next week, you could be CTO for crazy, but it doesn't matter because there's only 5 people at the startup and it's just the title isn't as meaningful. You can put it on your resume. That's great. But when you're questioned about it and you're questioned more deeply about it, it'll probably fall apart in the sense that you just don't have that experience that a larger like big tech senior engineer would have of doing the mentorship, of doing the proper documentation, of writing the docs, the design docs and stuff like that a senior developer would be responsible for, right? So it's that give and take. Like I've seen this on YouTube a lot where like people are chasing after these titles at startups. They're like, I want to be the chief growth officer or the chief whatever. Like no one cares. Like when you get to the next level, if you're a chief marketing officer of a 20-person company, like no one gives a crap. That doesn't mean anything. You haven't proven yourself. I'm sorry. The title means nothing. And at a startup, it means absolutely nothing. So it's something to consider.
Is it something where they're trying to get into the executive class or something maybe?
It's something like that, yeah.
Because I know that like oftentimes executives, once they become executives, then just are executives. Even if they're let go or things like that, or the company they're at closes, they are just like, well, I'm an executive now. And they just become executives across any other company they go. It's like, I'm a CTO, I'm a CFO, I'm a COO, I'm at the very least a director, if not senior director. And that's kind of as far as they'll go down the chain oftentimes. It's like once you become a director, you're a director. You're no longer like, oh, I'm not going to become, junior developer anymore. Like I don't do that anymore. Is that kind of what they're chasing? Where it's like they some people may see like we already mentioned the accelerated learning, but there's like an accelerated career path in terms of like a position title, like the actual title. And then you're like, I was CFO or I was chief of this. Now I can go to a big company and say I was CTO, I was this, I was that. Hire me as that. Hire me at that level.
So I'll be honest, I think a lot of it comes with like parents' expectations, like parents having high expectations of their kids and them caring more about titles than the kids understand are relevant. Like a lot of, I'm going to generalize here, a lot of immigrant parents, myself included, really care about titles for some reason. So
Okay.
they'll be like talking to their, friends and stuff like my son just became a CFO of whatever, like they do that a lot,
I
right?
see.
And so like they put the pressure on their kids to get these titles, again, meaningless at a startup, meaningless titles. And the kids obviously take that to heart and will try to do that because they think it's important. Is it important? Again, like you said, the director thing, like if you sell yourself well enough, yes. Right? Like if you can get, if it gets you a foot in the door into an interview at a big tech company because you were a director at a startup, that's good. Like that is a bonus that could happen, I think. Where it kind of falls apart for me is, again, the relevant experience of a director at a startup or a vice president or whatever, like a CTO, and a CTO of a massive corporation is so far away from each other that like they're not even on the same realm of jobs. Like it's a completely different job. right? Like a CTO of a startup is like doing legal things. Like they're doing a ton of compliance. They're doing a ton of hiring, like the middle manager. Like they're doing things that are completely irrelevant from a CTO of a startup, which is a lot of times just like a senior engineer or something like that, and someone that knows system design and like is able to form a team and stuff like that. Like it's just such a massive difference in skill sets that, like, yes, it might get you the foot in the door for like a director level position, which is good. So maybe you should chase titles a little bit, but at the end of the day, like you need to be the one that sells yourself and is able to convince the company to hire you based on skills that you might not have.
Okay, it's a good point. Like it's kind of interesting because it's like I didn't really think of the family angle, but then there's also like the other angle of like I don't even know what you'd say. It's like if you are trying to inject yourself into a large company and you're like, okay, I want to get there as quickly as possible. Okay, the title matters the most to me, whether it's due to parental influence or not. You're like, okay, I'm going to try to get to like the senior director position. And then what I'm going to do is I'm now a director. So I'll either always be a director or a senior director. That's as far as I'll do. So I'll go into, enter in startup company here. I'll be there for 4 to 5 years, maybe 2 years even, get to senior director. Then I'll go, okay, now I want to go into a FANG company and then I'll go and try to get into as a senior director there. Maybe I'll get into a director position. And it's just like you're trying to fast track. But then you're right, though. It's sort of like they might be looking for things like, how's your compliance? And you're like, well, I used to help the juniors sometimes.
That's
Like I
yeah.
used to help the juniors sometimes because like, no one was around or whatever. And like, or the senior guy was on vacation and it's like senior guy, like you don't have like 18 senior developers. Like, no, like the one senior guy wasn't around. So you're kind of like, it's a totally different situation. However, I will say, like, I mean, there are people that are really very charismatic and know how to sell themselves in such a way where they can be like, well, yeah, like, the senior leadership wasn't present during an absolute crisis. So I jumped in, that's a better way to present it than the way I just said it, which is sort of like what actually happened, but without the PR spin, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. So like you can sell yourself to do whatever you want. Like that doesn't really require a job title, but I guess the foot in the door does help. The job title
Right.
can get you that foot in the door. And if you're really good at selling, you're in a good position to get whatever job, because yeah, the directors are kind of very ambiguous jobs, but it's a tough one for me. Like I don't know. It doesn't, the job titles really don't matter to me that much. I think it's the deliverables, like what you were able to accomplish in the job is the only thing that matters at a startup level. Plus, obviously, the rewards and salary and the job security and stuff like that, which is exactly the next thing that I kind of want to talk about a little bit, is the job security, the salary and stuff, and stability. So with a startup, the employment stability is definitely going to be a higher risk in terms of like let's say a 5-year period, right? Is the startup going to be around in 5 years? Is the question mark. So it's a very real possibility, and the real possibility is that, like, as of 2022 on Forbes, 70% of startups fail within the first 5 years. Okay, and then on top of that, in 2023, a study was done by venture capital, that 90% of startups in general fail without the time scope, like the time screen. So you're talking like, you have a 70 or a 30% chance to stick with the same company for 5 years, probably at best, depending on when you join, because you might not join the first year, and at worst you might be out of a job pretty quickly, right? So you have to take that into account. You have to take the startup success into account, how they're generating income. Are they VC funded only? VC funded means that they need to generate income very quickly, and they're very much tied to the market. So I'll give an example, like during the 2020, 2021 kind of growth period of really low interest rates, VC money was flowing. It was easy to get because the interest rates were so low. VCs were almost like, the risk was very, very low for them to give out money. As soon as that interest rate started going up, VC money started to dry up, and a lot of startups started to fail because they were relying on the next round of funding and the next round of funding. They weren't relying on getting income from customers. Like we were talking about early in the episode, there's different ways for a startup to gain income. One of those ways is literally to just ride it out for a long time in the net negative until you get to a certain point where you're making a lot of money. So you're very much susceptible to market concerns. You're very much susceptible to just a wrong decision tanking your company. right? Like a leadership can make the wrong move and all of a sudden you're not generating enough income and bam, you're out of money because you just have less runway. A startup inherently will have less runway. Now, the higher reward potential does come here as well. If you find a startup that has high potential, so you see like, you go through their interview process, you talk to everyone, you go online, you research them, you talk to customers that use their product, and you see everything as being like very good, right? Like customers love their product. All the leadership has a good plan that you see going forward. A lot of times in the interview process for a startup, I highly recommend you ask those questions like, what's the plan for the next 5 years? What's the plan for income? Like, are you generating income? How are you funded? All those questions are relevant to ask in a startup interview because it's very much tied to your position there. And when you ask that, the people that are hiring you will appreciate it because they know that you're ready to work in that startup environment. You're not looking for that stability essentially, or you're looking for stability through the potential of their product versus stability just because they're too big to fail for a long time, right? So it's a different mindset that you have when you're working for a startup. And with that higher risk comes higher reward from the sense of like, if everything lines up and you really like where they're going, or if you're looking for a short-term thing, which is fine too, and you want to essentially get the most out of it, a lot of times startups will give higher equity portions. So options to be able to convert to stock, right? So they'll give you a percentage of the company before it's, publicly available for sale or for sold to another company for you to be able to hold on to that on the event of an exit or a liquidity event, which is like, could be many different things, but it could be a company is sold whereas then they buy all of the company, therefore they buy the stock from the employees back as well. So you get money for that. It could be that you go, public, right? Therefore other people can buy the stock and you can then sell the stock on the market that you have earned. Or it could be private stock sales, where if your company becomes big enough and is at the point where it's either going to get bought or you're going to go public, a lot of investors will come to you and ask you to buy your personal employee stock so that they have like the early price, essentially, because you're usually selling at a lower price than what the company buys it for or what your public offering is going to be. So there's multiple different ways for you to exit and get that money. Having said that, I just gave you a lot of grim numbers before with the fact that 70% of startups fail in the first 5 years, 90% of startups fail in general. So that's the gamble, right? The gamble is that the numbers are working against you. So you need to make sure, if you're going to take the equity, to do your due diligence yourself to make sure it makes sense for you to take it. Because sometimes companies will offer you like a sliding scale of like, do you want more equity and less money? Or do you want more money and less equity? That's where you have to make that decision. So lots of things to think about versus like a big tech, where obviously a big tech will most likely have higher employment consistency, like, and an easier way to have that stable income and like a bunch of benefits and stuff like that. On top of that, you'll have that career trajectory. You'll have some compensation packages with stocks and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be, the reward potential is not going to be as high for sure, because you're going to get way less stock than what you would get at a startup. And you never, like, in my opinion, this is another reason that I wanted to do this episode. These days, these big tech companies are laying off a lot of developers and a lot of people. So this greater stability and the more consistent employment is starting to go away from big tech. And so it's almost like maybe you should risk it, especially when you're younger, when you don't have as much stuff tied. Maybe you should start to try to risk it to try to make that larger kind of sum of money in early on, because who knows where our careers are going to be in the next 5-10 years. I feel like high risk is a viable option for a lot of people as long as you're able to take that risk.
I mean, it's really a gamble, and like, I mean, you mentioned it slightly there, but I mean, if the place is also purchased, you don't know how that purchase is going to go to. Like, is it going to be purchased and the value of your stock is going to tank to like near zero? Are you going to be laid off? Is it more of a, hey, I like your IP, but I don't like your employees, I don't like your business, so I'm going to buy all that, and then the owners or whomever, like the administrative circle, I suppose, kind of cash out, and then like you, I guess, maybe get cashed out, but maybe cashed out not in the greatest, I mean, amount of money, depending on how much stock you had. And then now all of a sudden it's like, now you're without a job and you're living off of like the peanuts of the stock that you had because you didn't have that much, because they're not going to give you like 40%, most of the time. Like, obviously, they're not going to be like, here, like, we'll keep 50 and you keep 40. It's like, well, no, if they're offering stock options to multiple people, I mean, you're going to likely get under 10%, depending on the size of this thing and how much they're willing to offer stock, under 5%. You might even get under 1%. So,
Yeah.
so you might only get, like a few $1,000s or whatever it is, depending on what the exit strategy is, especially based on the position of the startup. Like, if the startup made an amazing IP but is in trouble and then continues to try to fix its problems and then kind of gets down to the nitty gritty, and the owner's like, well, we were a $1 million company, now we're a $300,000 company, and you're going to make 1% of $300,000. I mean, you're not going to be buying a new house anytime soon.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. Everything you said is very accurate. It can definitely happen. So it's something to very much take into consideration when doing that evaluation, right? Like, what's the projected exit of this company? And that's something you could technically ask in an interview. They might not answer because they might not know, but that's something you could ask, like, what is your target exit for the stock? Like, what is the stock actually worth to you? Like, will you exit at, $1 a stock, $10 a stock, $15 a stock? A lot of times you are going to get less than 1% of a company. Like, that's just the reality of it. But that fraction of a percent, depending on how much the company is worth, could be, $100,000, could be $1 million. I don't know. It all depends on if you can exit. And that's the biggest gamble. Like, it is a huge gamble. I think the last thing I want to talk about here is going to be tech stack and innovation. So this is where I think some of the biggest benefit is on the startup side. Because a lot of times if you go big tech, you'll be using very battle test technologies that have been in deployment for like the last 10 years. You'll be using old tooling, internal tooling that was written by someone 10 years ago that's no longer with the company. You're going to be using stuff that I think a very like a trendy developer would consider boring, right? Now, not to say that it is boring, because like some of this tech is really, really cool and still really good. Just because it's 10 years old or 15 years old or written by internal people doesn't mean it's bad or not, not a good tool. But if you're someone that is looking to use the latest and greatest, startups are usually going to be the place for you to do that, because a lot of times they're building stuff from the ground up. And you have a lot more say in what is used. Like on the team that I'm working on right now, if someone wants to use a new IDE or if someone else wants to use a new library, they just bring it up to the team and we're like, okay, sure, that looks good, and we use it. Whereas with a large corporation, you want to use a new library, it has to go through 10 steps of approvals and like could get knocked, could get rejected for any reason. It could be just like a developer has used it before and hates it, but they used it 10 years ago and they, haven't seen the innovation. It could be that it has an old dependency that just doesn't fit into your stack or something. Like, there's just like a million different reasons why a new piece of tech won't work with old tech. So it is a pretty big consideration. Now, having said that, new tech isn't always the greatest. There's issues with compatibility sometimes. There's issues with just having better tool sets developed for it because it's so new. Like, you might not have the right stuff in your IDE for it. So like, it's not always good to go with the latest tech. And in fact, I would say that even if you're at a startup, you shouldn't be using the thing that came out yesterday. You should be using the thing that came out, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So it has been somewhat battle tested. And that is just, a better, safer tactic than using something that came out yesterday. But having that flexibility and using new things, like it's valuable for me. So I know some other people out there are probably going to want to have that. The ability to experiment with new things. Like, some people like that, right? Like a good chunk of developers are developers because they like to tinker, and you can tinker a lot at a startup. You can try new things. You can try new innovative technologies, completely like unburdened by bureaucracy. It's really cool. And I like that about it. Whereas in big tech, like, you're stuck with whatever's there, and to change anything is going to be an uphill battle for the most part. So you need to kind of accept that and be okay with the slower adoption of new technologies.
Well, the thing there too is, I mean, you mentioned bureaucracy. I mean, just tinkering with something. It's like, hey, can I spin up a quick VM that isn't even touching anything we have? It's like, well, did you sign, Form 2? Because Form 2 has to go to IT. That's going to be like a Sev like 8 out of like Sev 1, which is like an incident. So Dev 8. So I mean, they're backed up this far, so that could be 9 weeks. We're looking at possible delays, so like 2 years, and then it's like, whoa, like what's going on here? And it's like that could really happen depending on the size of the business. Like that absolutely could happen. And like depending on where the IT comes from, like if you have your own little like DevOps system and thing, I mean, maybe it's less. And that's how the company has like done it. However, I mean, if you do have like your own little mini DevOps team that's servicing your team and maybe a couple others, I mean, chances are they have less resources. So they may also be backed up in time, or they may not be able to spin you up an extra VM because the budgets have only allowed them to spin up the actual mission critical VMs. And so now it's like, well, I want to experiment. It's like, well, is experimenting on the docket? No. So like, you're out of here, right? So like big companies like are definitely like slow moving, hard to get things going. And I mean, again, it's all relative. I mean, some companies are going to be very receptive. Maybe they have a playground area or something for tech people to like experiment. But
like you said, there is different levels of corporate that has cool tools. Like I was with a friend at a corporate job recently, and they are using all the latest and greatest that I saw. Like maybe a little bit of an older version of React, but not a big deal. Like that's still really, really new, and they were using the latest IDE. So big tech can be kind of progressive in that way as well. So definitely not every big tech job. Is again, we're generalizing here. So just to give you an idea of what the kind of trade-offs you're going to be making when you make one of these decisions.
well, the thing with that too is want to kind of kick in is like we mentioned Windows, and how Windows is like this big thing that's like been around forever. I mean, we're on Windows 11 now, right? And I mean, it has a massive install base. We absolutely need to, have that thing be as like bug free as possible, as like stable as possible. However, Microsoft doesn't only make Windows. I mean, if Microsoft is like, let's experiment in like some other thing, like if I mean, when they were getting into the Xbox just 20 some odd years ago, it's like that's more of like a startup within a big company where they're like being really scrappy, trying to figure it out, trying to get things working. They're making prototypes, they're taping things together. People are running around with their heads cut off. It's like that's very startup-y within this big company where I would assume, and I was not there, but I would assume the Windows team is very like, this is our update structure. This is how we do this. This is how we back up. This is how we restore. This is how we push updates. This is, very rigid. Whereas the Xbox team, it's like, they don't have that yet. They're like, oh my God, like, what's an Xbox? What's a controller? Like, how do you use an analog stick? Is it this? Is it that? Where are we getting these things? What are we doing? How do we spin these up? And then it's just like chaos. And then obviously there's going to be that inter-team friction of like the Xbox team being like, Windows, we need somebody quick. It's like, no, you fill out Form 7, and it's gonna be like, well, no, like there's a fire, like there's a technical fire, and it's like, sure. So then Form 6.2, and again, I wasn't there. Like I'm just kind of making this up for fun, but you can kind of see the differences where it's like, you might work at Microsoft, but you might work at the cutting edge thing with React or whatever technology, and you might be in that little like startup department of a huge corporation, especially if it's a brand new product arm of the company.
Yeah, which is actually a really cool place to be. I think I've spoken to a couple of people that were in that situation, and it's just like a breath of fresh air, obviously, after all the bureaucracy. But then you also have to deal with the bureaucracy on the edges, like you're saying. I think there was a situation exactly like you described, by the way, between Xbox and Microsoft and Windows, where like Windows needed to open up like a single API to them, and it took them like 3 years. Something crazy, like something nuts. Don't quote me on that, but there was a situation I think I read in a book a little while ago. And it's definitely going to happen.
The Xbox team stole Windows.
That's it. They just
the
like
Xbox team stole Windows.
That's right.
Because they went to Windows and said like, and this is in the Power On or Power Up, I think it's Power On documentary made by Microsoft. But it was like the Xbox team was like, okay, like Bill Gates has approved this. We need Windows 95, I think it was at the time. And the Windows team was like, no, we're Windows. Like, what's an Xbox like kind of thing? It's like, what are you talking about? We're not giving you this. So then they were like, well, we know that their backups happen every Friday, and they go down these Ethernet cables, like literally like a heist.
Yep.
They go down these Ethernet cables at this time. So we'll just break into / like, I guess they're allowed, whatever. We're going to go into the data center. We're going to take those lines and like splice them, I guess, or however they did it. And we're going to take the backup of Windows 95. And then, I mean, I want to know who was the first, like when Xbox finally got up and running a little bit, they're probably like, who the fuck gave them Windows? Where, like, how did they get?
I don't think they knew for the first like 4 or 5 years. I think that they hit it or something like that. It was a crazy story. Like it's an absolutely insane story. They have to steal from your own company to gain some sort of a quicker advantage. They wouldn't let them. Nuts. But that's what happens with large companies. Like you just have those crazy internal frictions that can be even crazier than like company versus company. Like internal stuff can be just as toxic as external, which is kind of nuts. Yeah,
because Windows is king inside of Microsoft, so it's like, well, we're the Windows team.
That's exactly
like
it.
who do you think you're talking to, bud?
So I think we can wrap up this episode. I do have a couple extra points inside the show notes of this week's episode. So this is a good week to go on our website, htmlthings.com, check out the show notes for this podcast, because there's a couple of extra segments that I did not cover in this, like, the actual podcast, but are definitely cool to check out, like culture and work environment, ownership. Those things have a pretty big impact on your decision as well. So check out the show notes, htmlthings.com. But that's it for me.
All right. Well, I think it's time to run the old conclusion then. So remember that if you want to support episodes like this, we are on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML, all the things, and check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to the $3 tier patrons: Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mosteler from the website swoonworthydesigns.com. And you can also check us out check out Scrimba. With our affiliate link, if you're making a new account, you can get up to 20% off by using our link. Go and check that out. You can start learning with their interactive media player code editor. And depending on when this episode comes out, the back end courses may be available. So go and check that out. But even if they're not, the front end courses are fantastic. Use that interactive media player code editor to your heart's content, because I really enjoyed it when I took my one course there. And we'd like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review in the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media. On Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.